2018.
All right, we are now in March 26, 2018. This is Jane Humphreys. Jane, tell us your full name.
Jane Ann Waite Humphreys.
And where were you born?
I was born in Wausau, Wisconsin on May 5th, 1946.
Tell us your father's name, and if you can, remember his date of birth and what was his occupation.
My dad was Russell Howard Waite. He was born in Polar, Wisconsin, and he was born on June 7th, 1913. And he worked as a machinist in Wausau, Wisconsin.
Okay, now how about what's your mother's name, or what was your mother's name, her place and date of birth, and her occupation if she had one?
Esther Nora Thornberry Waite Spilsbury. And she was born in Elton, Wisconsin. I'm not positive about that. On January 27th, 1917.
Okay, now we want to talk about your grandparents. Tell me what you can remember, the names, places, and dates of birth, and any memories you have about your grandparents. Just anything that comes to mind.
Okay. My grandmother was Bertha Ann Grunberg Waite, and she was born in Bonn, Germany. And my grandfather was Henry Reuben Waite, and I'm not positive around where he was born. My grandfather was a tour guide for hunters, and he also built boats, and he ran a bathhouse at Muller's Lake. He enjoyed what he did, and I remember he used to get up early in the morning and he would cook up some very tasty fried potatoes and things, and then Grandma would prepare his lunch bucket as he went down to work. My grandmother was a very good housekeeper. She loved taking care of her home. She loved to garden. She loved flowers, and she would hold their little faces in her hands. Let's stop. My grandmother loved gardening, and she treasured her flowers. She loved them, and she'd hold their little faces in her hand and just talk to them. She loved going out and working with the flowers, and she loved canning, and she loved cooking, and she kept her house so neat and clean because she loved being a housekeeper. And when I was a little girl, my grandmother had read the Bible 35 times, and that was when I was a child. She loved the Bible, and she would sit in her chair and read those precious scriptures. They couldn't ever get her to take a nap till she was really old. And when she lay in the bed, she wouldn't move. She just laid there just straight as a stick. But she loved working, and she loved keeping things up, and she just enjoyed life. And she was always cheerful, and she loved making things for family. She made quilts and little booties for our feet, and she was just a sweet lady, a good grandma.
Okay, tell us about your childhood. Tell us, where did you grow up? Okay, I jumped the gun a bit. Jane's going to tell a little more about her grandparents.
My grandpa Waite, as I said, he was a guide for hunters, and we used to sit in the living room and he would strum his guitar and sing. That's how I grew up as a little girl when they would visit, or when we would go to visit them. And he had lots of hunting stories. And he told me as a little girl that if a bear was ever chasing me, to run downhill, because a bear can't run downhill because his innards will go in his throat and he will choke. And then he talked about if you heard lightning, to count so many numbers, then you knew it was close and you needed to get in where it was safe and never get under a tree. And I would walk with my grandmother at lunchtime, and she would take down a lunch that she had so neatly packed for him. And it was always a joy to go to the bathhouse, and I thought we were so rich because we could get a soda. Sometimes he'd give it to us, a grape soda, or we paid 10 cents, and I got to go in the bathhouse and change my swimming suit. And so I thought I was just really top-notch stuff to be able to go in that bathhouse without paying. But I loved Grandpa's stories until I got to be a teenager, and then began to get a little weary of them. But we sure honored our grandparents. Then Grandma, Sina Elizabeth Sparks Thornberry, came to live with us the day I came home from the hospital when I was born. And she lived with us for 16 years. And Grandma was such a secure place. My parents had to travel frequently for the church. And when we didn't go, we often went with them overnight. But when we didn't, we had Grandma there. And she was the best cook. And she would make popcorn in the kettle. And oh, that was good. And just felt so comfortable and loved to lay in the bed with Grandma, and we would just talk. And it seems like she had so many treasures in her room and in her attic. And she had a fox thing that stole in her attic, and so when I was little, I wouldn't ever go in that attic because that fox stole was in there. But we wouldn't have gone in anyway without permission from her. But oh, how I love Grandma Sini. Grandma used to have little treats in her room, but she used to make hard rock candy. She'd buy it at the store. It was on a string. It was white candy, and she ground it up in a container and put honey in it. And if ever we had a cough or a tickle in our throat, we'd go and Grandma would give us a teaspoon of that hard rock candy mixed with honey. And one of the greatest things I remember about Grandma is her great love of the gospel. I remember Grandma loving to go to church, and we didn't have a church house. We met up in an Elks Lodge on Sunday morning, and the brethren would have to go early and to clean up the cigarettes and cigars and whiskey and beer bottles so it would be clean so we could go after priesthood and meet. But the thing I remember is my brother would carry her up those long steps because Grandma couldn't go those steps. It was too much for her heart. But Jay would pick her up. He was about 16 is when I kind of remember it, and carry her up those steps so that she could be a part of the meeting. And she always had a songbook that she carried, her hymnal, that she treasured, that I loved seeing that book for a long time. When I was a little child, we had a dog named Chinook, and Grandma was having a lot of back trouble, and we came home. We'd been gone over the weekend or whatever, and we all came home, and the dog we let out, and it started running around the house. It went just 90 miles an hour. It was so excited for us to be home, and it came around and hit Grandma right in the back of the legs. She fell back on her back, and we were all just thought she had been killed. And they helped her up, and her back was healed from that dog knocking her over. My grandfather, on my mother's side, his name was George Washington Thornberry. And when I was a little girl, I heard about how handsome he was, how beautiful his eyes were. And my grandma loved him. As I got a little older, I heard other stories, and George had a little liking for the whiskey because he grew up as a taster for a winery for his family, and so he developed a taste for that kind of thing. But I always heard such good stories about him, and how when my mom taught school out at the Sherry, he'd get up and shovel a walk for her from her house, their house, to the schoolhouse, and I think it was about a mile, and he'd shovel a walk for her through that deep snow every morning so that she could get to the the schoolhouse, and I will look forward to meeting him. And I remember all the wonderful things I've heard about him, and remember not so much the things that the challenges he had in life. One more humorous thing about Grandpa Thornberry is he was quite good at making moonshine, and he would build stills in different places, and then my grandmother would find them and would destroy them. On one particular occasion, he had one close to the barnyard. He'd had it disguised, but she discovered it, and she went out and she tore it apart, and it was full of liquor, and that liquor rolled out into the barnyard, and the chickens and the cows got into that liquor, and they became quite drunk. And so that was a story I remember about George Washington Thornberry.
So Jane, tell us about your childhood.
I lived in Wausau, Wisconsin. That's where I came home from the hospital as a baby. I loved our home. It was a 2-story home, and it had a front porch that we used to stand out on when there were storms. And we had such good storms in Wisconsin, and we'd watch the lightning and listening to the thunder, and loved being out there. But loved the 2-story house. And my brother and I shared a bedroom so that Grandma could have, because it was a 3-bedroom home. My parents' bedroom was downstairs, and the other 2 bedrooms were upstairs. And so we never thought a thing about it. We just shared that bedroom, and that was a unique thing with my brother. And we used to listen at night to the radio, and we'd listen to No One Knows, how's it going, except the Scarlet Pimpernel. I can't remember that, and Gunsmoke. And Jay sometimes would go down and cut up a head of lettuce, and we'd each have part of that with salt on, and we'd be chewing on that when we, I can't think of the name. I know the Scarlet Pimpernel. Anyway, listened to that and loved sharing a bedroom together, and would love in the afternoon, the evening, the breezes off the lake would come when it was hot, because we didn't have air conditioning. But I can still remember those white curtains. Mom kept them so lovely, and they would just almost stand straight out from the breezes coming off, and that air felt so good. And off our bedroom, we each had an attic. My brother had one, and I had one, and we could keep our treasures in those attics. And then the greatest secret of all was in our bathroom upstairs. For a long time, we only had one bathroom for everyone. But if you pulled out the drawers in the wall for that bathroom, you could pull those drawers out and crawl back in to the attic that was in there that held such treasures. And when Bob and Dawn would come, my cousins, that's what we wanted to do, is get back in that attic and find things that were there. That we spent many a happy hour back there, didn't we? And when I was a little kid, I used to think, if some bad man came into the house, could I pull that drawer out, get back in that attic and get that drawer in, and they'd never know where we were back in there.
What kind of foods did you eat typically?
Well, we had a garden, and I learned to love golden bannon corn and Kentucky Wonder beans and kohlrabies. Oh, how I love kohlrabies. We'd sit in the garden with a hose, pull up those kohlrabies, peel them with a salt shaker, or we'd wash them off, peel them with a salt shaker, and just eat those in the garden. Oh, those kohlrabies. Grandma would be sitting on the lawn chair there with her apron on. I can still see her sitting there, and Mom, but we love those kohlrabies. And so we ate a lot of things out of the garden. Mom was a good cook, and we didn't go out to eat a lot. We ate what was at home. And as a little girl, I can remember, I was really tiny, we had a refrigerator where the Iceman would come, and I can still see those big tongs and how they'd pull put that ice in that refrigerator, and that's how it kept the things cold.
Did you wear any kind of unusual clothes that you can think of?
No, no. I remember Mom always made sure that I had cute things as a teenager, to go to the dances and things.
What kind of games did you play as a child?
Oh, I loved playing with my brother. He was good to me. Um, he taught me how to play marbles, and we used to play marbles out in the dirt. And then when I was in grade school, I'd go to grade school and play marbles, and I was good at it because I was with Jay and had my shooters. But in school, when we'd go in, they'd make us put our hands out to make sure that they were clean. And I remember my knuckles were dirty, and so I'd be licking my knuckles before the teacher got there just to try to get the dirt off from playing marbles. But then in the wintertime, Jay would get a piece of chalk, and Mom let us do that. And he would draw a circle on that rug in the living room, and we played marbles. And I learned a lot. Jay taught me a lot. Of course, he would always beat me, but I was pretty good from playing with him. And special shooters I would have. And he and I loved to Indian leg wrestle. And I remember Grandma saying, Esther, somebody's going to get hurt. They've got to quit wrestling. Somebody's going to get hurt. I can hear Grandma saying that. But love that. Yeah. And then my brother would build all these little houses on the property. He'd go and get wood over at Minnesota Mining, drag it home. And I can just hear my dad saying, Jerry, it's going to kill the grass with those little houses he built. But he would build those, and I loved going in those. Loved playing with him. I loved swimming. I loved skiing. I loved ice skating. I loved all sports, and I loved playing stretch with my brother, which was we'd stand facing each other and we'd throw a knife down and it would stick in the ground, and you had to move your foot over. You kept one foot in one spot and the other foot to where that knife landed. And then it would be the other person's turn. You throw that knife and they'd move the foot over to it. Well, of course, my brother won because he had long legs and I was just little. And I can't believe my mom let us do that, but never once got a knife in the foot. But loved to play stretch, and I got pretty good at throwing a knife.
Tell about Christmas and other holidays and how you celebrated them.
Christmas was an exciting time, but we opened our gifts on Christmas Eve. And so that was exciting. In the evening, we'd have to go upstairs. And sometimes I'd fight like a tiger when I got a little older because Santa Claus was coming and I could hear the bells down there and I just knew he was downstairs and my brother wouldn't let me go down. But Christmases were special. Quite often we had family home evening and sometimes we had to bear our testimony before we could open gifts. But one of the greatest things at Christmas time is when my cousins Bob and Don would come or we would go to their house. That made Christmases just so special. And one time my cousin knew she saw Santa Claus. Dawn knew she saw Santa Claus. But what fun we had with them at Christmas time, either at their house or our house. It was a special, you felt very safe and happy because Grandma was there, and Clyde and Vesta, and Bob and Don, and Dad and Mom. We were so safe and so happy and so content. And my Aunt Vesta would make the best candy. She would bring that, and sometimes she and Jay would slip off and have a little, just the two of them, having a little. But Vesta and Clyde and Bob and Don were such a part of my childhood growing up. And such a love was developed for them. And just hated when we had to part. But beautiful memories, beautiful memories.
What was discipline like at your home?
We weren't, I can only remember one time that my dad spanked me. When I was a little girl, I went across the street over into the Minnesota mining. I was little. My brother was over there playing, and I wanted to be with him, so I started over there by myself, and that was dangerous. And my dad came, and he swatted me one on the rear end and told me never, ever, ever to do that. And that's the only time. My dad never yelled at me. It seemed like we just knew what was expected, and we didn't want to do things to disappoint our parents.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Irving School, is where I went to grade school. And when
How did you get there?
Walked to school. On really cold days, Mom would take us, but we walked to school.
How many children were in the classroom typically?
It was small. I would say probably 15 to 20. But when I was in kindergarten, walking home, there was this girl in our neighborhood that lived down a couple of houses, and she loved to terrorize me when I was little. And she'd take my papers away from me and tear them up in front of me and stuff when I was coming down the hill, till Mom got wind of that. And that stopped.
Did you have any favorite teachers?
Yeah, I liked all my teachers. I enjoyed school. School was a happy time for me. I can't give you a name, but it was just a happy time. I had a history teacher in junior high school that I really enjoyed. Learned a lot from him. Can't think of one name of teachers. I can see their faces. And back then, Mom would invite them for dinner. I think that was kind of the tradition, wasn't it, Don?
What was your first paid job?
I taught swimming at the city pool.
Okay. What kind of hours did you put in there?
Oh, it was just maybe 4 hours.
How much money did you make?
You know, I'm trying to remember. I don't remember if it was a quarter or $1 an hour or something like that. It wasn't much. But I just loved teaching swimming because I love to swim.
Okay, very good. What
say
were
one
your...
We lived across the street from Minnesota mining, and many happy hours were spent there. There were logs there that they had dropped off from something. They looked like Lincoln logs, except they were gray. And so we used to take those and build forts. Do you remember that? Those forts?
Those big caves of,
Yeah, we built
or mounds.
we built forts. And one time, you can delete this if you need to. One time I was over there with my girlfriend, and we were in the bottom of the fort, and some big old teenage boys came, so we were in the bottom really quiet. And one of the boys decided he just needed to defecate at the top of the cave, and that came dropping down. And I called her Twinkles. Her name was Delphine. Twinkles and I were cowering in the corner of that as that dropped down there, and we thought they'd never leave. It didn't hit us, but it dropped down there. And then, but the fun we had with those forts. And then one time, a boy in our neighborhood name was Bobby Moore, and I was playing with my friend over there, and he got a little mouthy, and so I told him I would fight him. I took off my wristwatch and put up my shoulders, and we boxed a little bit. I remember my arms were all black and blue where he was hitting my arms, but we boxed a little. I showed him that I was not just a girl, that I could stand up for things. But there was a tar pit there where they had dumped tar over a long period of time, and it wasn't a pit, it made a tall hill. And you could climb up that, but it really took great technique, I thought. And as when I was little, I couldn't hardly get up it. My brother would go up, and he knew where to grasp a hold of it and go clear to the top. But as I aged, I learned how to do it, and I thought I had really conquered something when I could climb the tar hill. And then there were great big hills of sand that they had used for roofing, and they were different colors. And oh, how we loved Bob and Don. We'd go over there and play in those sand hills and get it in our clothes and our shoes. We'd slide down them. And I first learned to ski on those. Used battle rubber around canning bottles to hold my skis on. And that's where I learned to ski, is off of there. But anyway, we would play in those sand hills and have it in our shoes and our clothes. And Mom had just scrubbed and waxed the floors to be really nice when Vesta and Clyde and the kids were coming, and we'd drag that sand in and it would scratch. It would scratch those newly waxed floors, but what fun we had. And then there were lots of trees in there, and there was a brook in there. It was a child's playground back in there.
Okay, Jane, tell about what you did for in your leisure time. Do you in clubs? Do you have any youth organizations, sports, games, dances, and so forth?
Okay, as a little girl, I loved being outside, and I collected animals. I collected frogs, and I made a pen for them full of frogs. I just loved pets. And I loved to climb as I got older in that big oak tree out in front. I loved being up there, but Mom was very watchful.
Did your parents ever disapprove of any of your activities as a child?
No, they never did, and they never put restrictions like I didn't have a time I needed to be home. They just knew I would come home. And they never disapproved of my friends. They knew I would never do anything. And I just had fun. I had good friends that were with me from the time I was in G.D. Jones School, 5th and 6th grade, clear up till I graduated. Same group of friends. There was a boy that I liked in 6th grade, and I liked him clear up to 11th grade. But I had my standards, and drinking was not part of that. So, but no, my parents didn't. They knew my friends. They knew all of them, but they weren't ever strict about it because they just knew they weren't with my brother either.
Okay, tell now about your marriage and how did you meet your partner and how that went?
Well, I have to tell about when I was a teenager, we'd go to Teen Town. I loved going to Teen Town on Friday night. That was so much fun. And the boy I liked, it was fun to just dance with him, and once in a while our cheeks would touch. And that was, really, or we'd hold hands for a minute.
What was his name?
His name was Dale Hosley. And oh, I had such fun at Teen Town. I loved to dance. We had such a good time. And then we would walk to Sam's Pizza, even in the winter time. We would walk clear over to Sam's Pizza. That was all part of it. Such a good time. But one time my brother, he would take me to Teen Town sometimes, and my dad had bought a Cadillac, and they just got it, and they were letting Jay take it on a date, and they just got the car. But anyway, he was supposed to take me and Dale and my friends, and I remember him saying, I don't want all those muddy shoes and that car to go to Teen Town, but he took us and cleaned it up. But Dad let him take that car just when they brought it home. But what fun I had at Teen Town. I enjoyed being a teenager. It was not hard, even though my friends were all non-LDS, because there weren't, other than Dudley Schwartz. But they were just good kids. We never tried to do anything wrong. Just had a good time. Enjoyed being a teenager. I went to Ricks College, and at state conference back at home, there was a missionary that would come up and said he'd heard that I was going to Ricks College and that he had a girlfriend there. And when I went back, if I'd please look her up, and I just thought, why are you asking me? But anyway, I never did, and I went back to Rick's College, and then when he got off his mission, he looked me up, and the girlfriend had fallen in love with somebody else, and so I started dating him there, and we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of fun things, and he introduced me to the hot pools up there in High C in Idaho, where in the wintertime you could go and sit in these hot tubs and the snow would fall on your head. And I thought I was just experiencing the greatest things. And so we had a lot of fun, and then we got engaged on Rexburg Hill. That should have told me something. Anyway, and we were married in the Salt Lake Temple. And we were married for 25 years. And just because of some unwise choices, that union ended. But we had 3 beautiful children because of it.
Okay, we're almost done, but we're going to talk about your religion for a moment. What you did on Sundays, and you have told a little bit about that, but tell about your religion and your religious experiences.
Religion was a very important part of my life. I remember as a little girl, 3 or 4, praying that my dad would join the church, and he did join the church. My mom was a member, and there were missionaries around in our home. But one day my dad went to my mom and said, "You need to get your missionaries here. I've got to listen to them or I'll be destroyed." And so they came and taught him the gospel, and he loved it with all his heart and never looked back. I had so many spiritual experiences as a child that has shaped my love of the gospel. Our home was a gathering place for the missionaries. We had a lot of mission meetings there, and sometimes we'd have 50 missionaries in that living room with President Smoot. My folks bought a special chair for him. But I remember even as a child, I loved that feeling of all that priesthood in my home, and it made such an impression. And one of the great experiences I had was we had a certain amount of missionaries that were coming for the meeting, and they kept coming, and Mom had made a roast and mashed potatoes and gravy and fed all those that were there, but more kept coming. And every time she'd go to the pan, there would be mashed potatoes and gravy and roast. There was enough food to feed all those people that came that were unexpected. I truly witnessed the fishes and the loaves and that experience. Had a lot of General Flaherty stay in our home. I sat on Marion D. Hanks's lap when I was young, and he told me stories. Missionaries told me so many stories as we'd be riding in our car. A lot of my life was spent going to church meetings on weekends. I thought everybody lived like that. I didn't know. But we'd hold church in the morning in Wausau, then we'd travel to Anigo and hold church there, and then we'd come home for sacrament meeting. And I would be so car sick. I would just throw up. And so Mom started giving me car sick pills, and then I was so groggy, and I was trying to sit up in Anigo in those meetings, and I just wanted to lay over because of being so groggy. But all those things developed my testimony. And then Camp Sturtevant, we gathered there for conferences, and the powerful talks that were given. It was down by a river, and we'd sit up on the hill sometimes. There were chairs down there in that sand by that, but the powerful talks that were given, and the Spirit was so strong that even as children we could feel it. But it was fun because Bob and Don would be there, and Vesta and Clyde, and just had such a good time. We'd bring our lunches, and then sometimes it would rain, and we'd have to go inside the lodges, and there was no air conditioning, and it would be so hot in there. But we'd have fun. We'd just have fun. I watched little children. I loved little babies at that time. but all the spiritual experiences. And then trying to think of the general authority that came. It was so powerful. We had breakfast at our house. Mom had made this lovely big breakfast for him, and he could hardly eat because he just preached to us. Can't think of his name. Hopefully it will come to me. But, just too many spiritual experiences. I could never, ever deny the truthfulness of the gospel because I experienced the beauty of it. Yes. That general authority was LeGrand Richards, and Mom had prepared this big breakfast, and he could hardly eat because he was just teaching. He was teaching us at breakfast, told just beautiful stories and faith-promoting experiences. So got to meet President McKay as a child and witnessed the effect it had on members that were investigating. I've had so many spiritual experiences that I had the privilege of meeting President David O. McKay. Dad had been driving him around as he toured the district, and then he arranged for us to go up and meet President McKay. And we had Bernice Frederick with us, who was an investigator, and she said, "Oh, he's just a man. He's just an ordinary man. You may call him a prophet, but he's just ordinary." And so they got Bernice up there, and she shook hands with President McKay, and the tears flowed, and she said, "He is not an ordinary man." And it was shortly after that she was baptized. I have had the privilege of living in numerous places, and each place have made such wonderful friends and have had such great priesthood leaders that were a part of my life. Everywhere I went, it was truly, I think the Lord had a hand in it, because each one was a marvelous experience for me. Had the opportunity to move out to Grays Lake, Idaho, and that was quite a culture shock, moving from California out to ranching area 40 miles from town. But I learned to love the call of the cows and the whinny of the horses, and seeing the young colts as I'd stand at our bay window looking down on the field to see those colts running with their mothers and kicking up their heels. I love springtime out there, out on the lake, all the ducks and geese and cranes that were there. It was like a city out there at night, all the noises and the sounds. I loved all that. I loved the call of the coyotes. I would open my window at night there when it was so cold, but I could hear those coyotes howling. Loved that. The beauty. It was fun to be snowed in because we were so secure. And Doris and Reed lived just up the road, about a block from us. I always knew they were there. And Doris taught me how to can, and Reed kind of watched over us. But I learned to love many of the things out at Grays Lake, and everywhere I lived. California, oh, how I learned to love the ocean. Idaho Falls, I met Brother Jardine, who was the patriarch. What an experience in my life. Many spiritual experiences in his little room that he gave patriarchal blessings, and he gave it to a patriarchal blessing to two of my children. And my children are Shane Russell Humphreys. He was born in 1970, July 24th, in Appleton, Wisconsin. And Terry had been told that he couldn't have children, and I was devastated because that was such an important part of my life. I wanted children so bad. And we moved back to Wisconsin, and my dad gave Terry a blessing, and Shane came. So he's a special little boy. And then we lived back in Wisconsin, and my father became very ill. He was making a cradle for Shane. He wanted a grandchild so bad, and he wasn't feeling well, but he kept working on that cradle, and he brought it down July 4th, to 1970, but down to Appleton from Wausau, and he was so sick we took him to the hospital, and they thought first he just had the flu, and then for some reason they opened him up and he was filled with cancer. But my dad lived 1 month. He died August 25th. He lived long enough for me to get on my feet after having cesarean, and he hung on long enough, and he was in this. We were in the same hospital together, and after Shane was born, the nurse helped me take him up so Dad could see him, and Dad put his glasses on, trying to look at Shane, and he was so excited to have a grandchild, but he didn't get to have that experience in his life with him. Oh, how I adored Shane. He was such a thrill to have. And then when he was 2, Amber came along. And Amber was the most beautiful little baby. And Amber was a sweetheart from day one. She was always happy. It was just a pleasure raising Amber. Just a wonderful child. And so grateful to have her add to our family. And she was born in California, in Corona, California. And then 5 years later, after we moved to Grays Lake, we were blessed again with Jamie Rachel Humphreys Dobson. And we were excited to have her to join our family, and everybody catered to her because they loved her so, and she was the baby. Shane could hardly wait till she started crawling so that she would crawl into his room and to see his things. But once she was able to do that, he wasn't as excited when she'd mess up his cars that he had so neatly placed. But what a joy the children were. I loved for summer break that they would be home. I loved always when they had breaks from school, and many happy experiences with the children. The Lord blessed me with 3 wonderful children. Amber Humphreys married Dave Vetter, and they had the opportunity to travel a lot around the world. He was in the Air Force. Amber was away from home quite a bit. I wish she had been closer, but she gave us 2 beautiful grandchildren, Dallin Jacob Vetter and Seth Joseph Vetter. Love them with all of my heart, and so happy to welcome them in the family, and they're a joy to have. And Jamie Rachel Humphreys married Matt Dobson, and they had 3 children, Lex, Matt Dobson, Isabella Lynn Dobson joined the family, and we were so excited when she came. And then when there was Kai Matthew Dobson, and he was a sweet little baby. The one thing about Kai is I remember right after he was born, I was there at their house, and I was holding Kai, and he looked up at me, and he gave the most beautiful smile, knowing smile, and Jamie saw. I said, Jamie, did you see that? Not like sometimes newborns will just, smile out of. This was a knowing, and he looked me right in the eye. And Jamie saw it too. What a unique experience that was. My grandchildren are so precious to me. Each one has added such a significant part to my life, and I enjoy each one, and they all have unique personalities and such wonderful gifts. I feel very blessed to have them as a posterity. So thankful for my grandchildren.
Okay, Jane, tell us about jobs you've had as an adult.
All right, as I had mentioned earlier, I taught swimming. I was 16, I believe, when I taught swimming. Then I worked at Mill J clothing store for a short period of time. Then I worked in a hospital taking trays to patients, and that's where I first smelled coffee. I had never really been around it before, but I enjoyed, and I thought how interesting working in a hospital. And I desired when I got older to either be a nurse or a psychologist, something in that area, because I enjoyed being in the hospital and working with patients. I cleaned rooms at a hotel right before I went to my first year of college, and I must say I did not enjoy it. There was not air conditioning, and it was hot and humid in Wisconsin, and that is one job that I would want to repeat. I worked at a bank. I was a teller in a bank when I went back to Wisconsin after being in college, and I took a course in programming computers when they were huge, and you had a big board that you programmed computers on. I took a class in that, but I wasn't sure I really liked that. And then after I was married in Salt Lake City, I worked for Walker Bank and Continental Bank, and then stop for a minute, I can't remember. When I lived in Grays Lake, I was a substitute teacher, and so that was an interesting experience in a little country school. And then when we moved into Idaho Falls, I was a substitute teacher for quite a while, and then I had a teaching principal. Dr. Tolman asked me if I'd come be his assistant while he was taking care of his principal jobs, and I would take the class and teach the class. So I did that until I moved to Orem, and when I moved to Orem, I went into BYU with Amber because she was going to school there. I was just down in the lobby at the Marriott Center while she was getting her tickets for the games, and I just happened to ask at the counter, I said, do you have any openings? And the lady said, well, would you like to interview right now? And normally you can't get a job in there unless you know somebody. But the Lord had a hand in that, and I went in, I wasn't dressed for it, I went in, interviewed, and they hired me on the spot, and I worked there at BYU, selling tickets to the games. And what a privilege for me, because I got to see so many of the general authorities and the apostles. And then I remember on devotional day when the prophet would come, and I'd get to go up and listen, and when all those students would stand and they'd sing, we thank thee, O God, for a prophet. I got to witness that and feel that spirit. And so I worked at the ticket office, and then they asked me if I would work at the new museum that they built when the Etruscan was coming in, and so I worked there scheduling schools for tours. And when Amber got married, I was able to get her a job working at that museum. That was her part-time job when she was going to school. But I enjoyed that very much. And I remember the first game I worked, and they said something about Lavelle Edwards. Oh, you came in. I said, who's that? And they said, it's Lavelle Edwards. I had no idea who he was. But I also remember President Monson coming in this big white Continental car, and they'd pull underneath the bleachers there at BYU, and he'd get out, and he had a tan jacket on, but when he got out of the car, he put his suit coat on. And oh my gosh, I was so impressed that I got to witness that. And then L. Tom Perry was the only general authority that ever came in Levi's and a Levi jacket. All the other general authorities were dressed for. After I worked there, then a company there in Provo, some of the people at the Marriott Center had told them about me, and so Robert, can't think of his last name, Moss. called me and asked if I'd be willing to come and be his office manager. And it would be more money than I was making at BYU and a few more hours. And so I was scared, but I did it. I went and worked that job until we moved to St. George. And then in St. George, Shane had applied for a job at Best Inn and Suites as assistant manager, but the hours they wanted, it wouldn't work with schooling. He said, but my mother is looking for a job. And so I went and applied, and Kayleen hired me as assistant manager at Best Inn and Suites. So that was my first introduction to the motel business, and then she left and I became the manager. And then that was sold. And one of the owners said, Jane, if it was up to me, if I own this, I would give this hotel to you. He said, because it's you. And that was quite a compliment. But some of the other owners wanted the money from it. And from there, it was bought out by East Indians. And then the accountant for Best Inn and Suites saw that Crystal Inn was looking for a manager. I didn't know that, but he sent in a letter of recommendation, and he called me on the phone and he said, I've sent in a recommendation, you better call him and fill out an application. And so that's how that job came about. I applied and drove up to Salt Lake. I didn't care whether I got it or not, and met with Chuck Magalette. He owned all the Crystal Inns, and now he owns the Mavericks. And Dave DeYoung interviewed me, and they hired me. I was 58 years old. And so I went to work for Crystal Inn.
When were you retired as manager?
Okay, I became a manager of Crystal Inn and trained up in West Valley. And that was an experience, the training. That was hard because I didn't know what I was doing and I had to learn all that in computers. But Don and Gary came to visit me, and I was driving an old car. And they came and we went and looked for cars, and I purchased a car under their guidance while I was still in training, a little red Toyota, and that has been the best car. But what an adventure we had with Don and Gary. And I remember Dave gave me a blessing up there that I would be able to do it, because I thought I'm way over my head in this one. And then Gary gave me a blessing, and I was able to do the job. So again, the Lord had a hand in all. I retired from Crystal Inn at 65, and I had a couple of years where I was able to not have to work. So I worked in the temple for more than 2 years and enjoyed that. But the time came I knew I needed to then I knew that I needed to go to work, and so I gave my notice at the hospital, and I applied for a job at, I gave my notice at the temple, I'm sorry, and I applied for a job at the hospital, and they hired me first as a PRN, just working part-time. On the very day the job was available for me to work, on the day that I had worked at the temple, so it was time for me to leave the temple. That was guidance. The Lord, again, had a hand in me getting the job at the hospital. I worked as a hospitality hostess there for a little over 4 years, and then because of circumstances, I had to stop. Yes.
Okay, Jane, tell us about callings you've had in the church.
I will say that it was always hard for me to give talks from the time I was little. I would cry. I'd have my talks memorized so well, and I'd stand up there and the tears would fall. And I did that clear till I was 12 years old. Every time I had to give a talk, oh my gosh, the tears would come. But anyway, I finally conquered it when I was 12, and I was able to get up and give the talk. But I had lots of church callings. I was a visiting teacher from the time I was 14, and sometimes we'd have to travel over an hour to get to Enigo to do our visiting teaching, but I just thought that was all a part of life. I have been mutual president numerous times, primary president numerous times. I was in the Stake Relief Society. I've been a counselor in Relief Society, and 3 different times they called me to be Relief Society president, and we moved. 3 different times that happened. And I've taught classes in all the different departments, enjoyed working in each of them, and enjoyed teaching in Relief Society. And have been a visiting teacher all these years, even when I was in college. That was just part of life, but loved all the growing experiences in the church calling.